It's time for the Maximum PC No BS podcast, episode 241 for the week of November 11th, 2015. On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the Steam controller, Fallout 4 performance, SSDs, VR, and Tim Cook's latest negative comments about the PC. So all that and more is coming up right now. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Jimmy Thing, and joining me as usual, our associate editor, Alex Campbell.
Hello.
Editor-in-chief, Tuan Nguyen.
Hello.
And remotely, we have senior editor, Jared Walton.
Hello, guys.
I'm like, did we lose you? So if you're, so we do apologize for being really late with the podcast. We were, like the past couple of months, we've been in the process of a move. We finally moved into San Francisco proper. Before we were in South San Francisco, which is actually a different city. So we're near Pier 39 now, all situated. So hopefully this podcast situation can change. So let's go ahead and get started with the first topic.
Don't ask me any questions because you guys are totally dropping out.
Oh, really? So yeah, the issue with Jared being remote is that we're actually using Google Hangouts, so there might be some issues there. So bear with us as we go under construction. Yeah, so hopefully not. But Jared, if you need us to repeat anything, feel free to ask. All right. So first topic, this caused a big storm, the PC storm, and yesterday with Tim Cook saying that basically PCs are becoming irrelevant. So I'm going to go ahead and read the quote here. In regards to PC, he tells the Telegraph, he goes, no, really, why would you buy one? And he goes, yes, the iPad Pro is a replacement for a notebook or desktop for many, many people. They will start using it and can conclude that they no longer need to use anything else other than their phones. And so what do you guys, this caused a big, massive shitstorm yesterday. What do you guys think about that?
I think people take it out of context, pretty much. What's that?
Oh, I think we lost Jared.
Yeah, we lost Jared.
Oh,
okay.
Oh, dear.
I'm here, actually. It's just that it's really breaking up on your end, so I'm going to try a phone call where I can at least hear your side of the conversation, maybe.
So as I was saying, it's ambiguous, his statement, because it really depends on what you're using your quote-unquote PC for. I mean, for people like us, an iPad or any tablet would never replace a PC. We play games, we do a lot of desktop class heavyweight software, but for those who are just doing simple email content consumption, like reading a book or reading websites, I can totally understand how that device could replace a bigger desktop. I mean, for someone like my mom, whose primary use of her computer is email only and word processing, maybe she can just, maybe she can replace her whole PC.
Yeah, but then he goes, I think if you're looking at a PC, why would you buy a PC anymore? So it's kind of like a condescending question.
Yeah, I don't think an iPad you're going to be doing, Adobe Premiere on the iPad Pro. And I wouldn't try to do it on the Surface either.
No.
It's just not the platform.
Yeah, but if you take his whole sentence, everything he said as a whole, then it makes sense in those specific cherry-picked situations, like I mentioned. Mm-hmm. But if you break up whatever he said into individual sentences, then yeah, that last one that Jimmy you just said is terrible. But if you take it together with the sentence before that, then it's like what I said.
So actually, I think I read it wrong. He actually said it in reverse order. So he goes, I think if you're looking at a PC, why would you buy a PC anymore? No, really, why would you buy one? Yes, the iPad Pro is a replacement for a notebook or a desktop for many, many people.
For some people.
For some people.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think an iPad is a pricier object than, say, a cheap... a lot of things, if you're going to argue that, I just want to look at photos or email or surf the web, then you can get a Chromebook that's cheaper than a lot of the iPads out there anyway.
Right.
So
it'll definitely be cheaper than the Pro.
Exactly. Definitely cheaper than the Pro. Still has a keyboard. Some iPads, a lot of iPads are touchscreen too. So I don't see really where they're making headway. I mean, I can see it for certain classes of business users and things like that might have more utility for it, but for general media consumption, I don't think the iPad Pro offers much more than, say, the iPad does for your general, consumer. So
this morning, I believe he also said, or rather, there was a story this morning. He was asked about the Surface Book, and he goes, "It's a product that tries too hard to do too much. It's trying to be a tablet and a notebook, and it really succeeds at being neither. It's sort of diluted." I find this comment kind of strange because the iPad Pro
tries to replace the notebook and a PC.
Exactly. I mean, they're very similar devices. It's a tablet with an attachable keyboard that comes with a stylus, and both are convertibles that are trying to appeal to both the tablet needs and the professional working needs. So I find it kind of strange that he would say that the Surface is doing too much, and it's like they're very similar things.
Yeah, unless they've got something up their sleeve like it makes you sandwiches or something on top of it. They're almost the same device. They're really the same class of
I
device.
think the biggest difference between them is the fact that one is running x86. You can run all your legacy Creative Suite and Premiere and Photoshop and Illustrator. Whereas iOS does have some video editing stuff like that, as I understand it, but they're very streamlined and they're simplified.
Right. And there's only so much you can do with the interface that's designed for your fingers.
Right. I think the big takeaway also is that iOS is meant as a mobile operating system. It's not fully featured like desktop Windows is. I mean, with the Surface, you get a desktop Windows experience.
Because it is running a desktop.
Right.
It's true desktop.
It's running a true
Windows
desktop
10.
OS. The iPad isn't. It's running iOS. Yeah. So by definition, it's kind of crippled for when it comes to doing a full suite of desktop tasks. It's not in the same class as a laptop, and it can't be called a laptop replacement if you're going to use a mobile methodology where a laptop and a desktop really belongs.
So here's my take on the whole Apple thing. It's kind of funny because there's no way you are going to get the processing power in any tablet that you're going to get in a desktop or even a larger laptop. Like, you look at these tablet devices and you're talking about things that use 5 to 10 watts of power, and you're not going to get the video editing capabilities of something that consumes 10 to 20 times as much power. So it's like things will get better, and you can do stuff on an iPad Pro. I'm sure that's pretty cool, and for a lot of people it will be fine, and some people will replace their desktop PCs and notebooks with a tablet or whatever. But I think the market as a whole, there's always going to be a place for laptops and desktops.
I agree.
All right. Moving on to another hot topic. Fallout 4 just came out this week, and Jared, you've been testing it all day yesterday, right? Can you tell us about what the game's like, how the game's like, and how it performs?
So it's pretty funny. It's like Fallout 4 is a lot like Fallout 3, right? You look at it and you're like, how old is Fallout 3 now? It's got to be like 6 or something, 8 years. I don't know. Anyway, it's been out for a long time. And Fallout 4, you step into it and you're like, okay, maybe the graphics are a little bit better, but the game world hasn't radically changed. I mean, it's a different story, and that's cool. But performance is definitely demanding. I mean, like 4K resolution on a Titan X or a 980 Ti or a Fury X, it's not going to happen at ultra quality unless you're happy with 30 frames per second. So it's really demanding. And for the way it looks, I know some people are going like, well, come on, this is worse looking than, and they'll name a bunch of games. And it's true, it does look worse in some ways. But then you have this whole open world thing where the Fallout 4 landscape is just huge compared to what you would see in like Call of Duty or whatever. So as far as performance goes, I'm putting together the final numbers. You'll basically be looking at either dropping from ultra quality at 4K, or you'll have to turn down a few settings at least. Or if you look at, other options, lower resolutions, you can certainly run faster. If you're wondering about the AMD versus NVIDIA side of things, NVIDIA wins right now. That's with the latest drivers from both camps. It's pretty much a landslide in favor of NVIDIA. And it's kind of funny because, like, I think Fallout 4 is still a DirectX 9 engine, right? So AMD's been touting the benefits of DirectX 12 and how their architecture is better for it or whatever. And that may very well be true, but we know that for the next couple of years, we're still going to see a lot of games that are coming out using DirectX 11 or 10 or 9 or whatever it may be. So you don't need to use DirectX 12 to create a great game. But if your graphics drivers basically say, oh, we're only going to worry about DirectX 12, you're going to have some problems.
You mentioned that the game is very graphically demanding. Is that a result of it being a poor port, or do you think there are enough like bells and graphical bells and whistles to justify that?
What I would love to see is what Fallout 4 could look like using DirectX 12. Not just look like, but how it could run. Because, I talked about how it's this open world and you have these larger view distances. So that right there means there's going to be a whole lot of polygon traffic and such where you're calculating all of these things. And that's something where the overhead of the CPU can make a difference, and the optimizations for DirectX 12, the lower level API, could really help. So, I wouldn't be surprised if they could optimize things to make it run faster, but at the same time, it's like, well, do you really want to put that much effort into that side of things if it just makes everything else harder? And I don't know that there's a real answer. I know like Fallout 4 was announced officially just like 2 or 3 months ago, and the announcement was like, hey, look, here's Fallout 4. It's shipping in October or November or whatever. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's coming out this year. Well, if they were doing DirectX 12, I can pretty much guarantee it would not be shipping this year. So it's this trade-off, right? But overall, I think I've done some CPU testing as well, and the game is definitely hitting the CPU a fair amount. So if you've got a lower, Core i3 running at 3 gigahertz or whatever, the game's going to feel a little more choppy than if you're running a quad core or hex core or whatever system. It's still a great game, and ultimately I think that's what you need to look at. And the question is, well, what settings are you able to play at? And for a lot of people running lesser hardware, they're probably going to need to give up either shadow distances, which doesn't really hurt that badly, or just turn down the settings to high.
I heard that from what I was seeing online, that people were saying God Rays is the new PhysX for NVIDIA. Like, it really kills AMD performance. I don't know if you've seen that or been able to test that.
There's not a whole lot of settings you can tweak in Fallout 4. I mean, or at least I haven't really looked into it carefully. Everything seems to run on either NVIDIA or AMD hardware. Like, there's no PhysX stuff where you can only use it on NVIDIA, right? There's no TXAA. They use TAA, which is, I believe, just temporal anti-aliasing, but they're not using it in a proprietary NVIDIA-only fashion. So, everything runs on both sides. I don't know that the game was necessarily promoted by NVIDIA. So I
think it was.
Was it? Because
I think so.
It doesn't have the NVIDIA, the way it's meant to be played logo pop up when you load the game. Wrong, then. So, I'm sure NVIDIA helped them with some things, or at least gave them some suggestions, or maybe optimized the drivers. I don't know, but like, as far as I know, this is sort of that vendor agnostic approach to gaming. So it's interesting. And I said earlier, NVIDIA wins, but like, let's not read too much into that. It's like NVIDIA is, 20, 30% faster in some cases, but the game is still totally playable. And it has a default 60 frames per second cap, which is something that I hate, because like, hey, what do you do if you have a 144 hertz display? Too bad for you. So then you remove the cap, right? And this is kind of funny.
And that changes the speed, as I understand it.
It does, and it actually changes it. From what I can tell, anything below 120 frames per second, you're okay. But if you go above 120 frames per second, it starts speeding up.
Does somebody need to put their phone away?
What is that?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out. Every time scavenger.
Oh, Twan's got a video running.
Oh, that's a stupid ad.
I hope that's not on Maximum PC.
Nice.
I hope that wasn't Maximum PC.
I exited.
So yeah, you were saying that the speed was tied to the frame rate, yes?
Sort of. So like I know, like everything up until about like 1080p Ultra, it doesn't matter what GPU you're running without the frame cap in place. You know, it's editing the INI file and turning iPresent interval from 1 to 0 if you want to know the hack. But anyway, you do that and everything is okay up until about 120 frames per second. And then as you go above that, you'll start to scale the game speed. So like my benchmark sequence that I'm running is about 40 seconds long normally. Well, on a 980 Ti running 1080p medium quality where frame rates are like 180 frames per second, the benchmark now takes like 30 seconds instead of 40 seconds. So I'm like, actually, it's kind of cool because
25% faster.
Yeah, so it's like if you get tired of the slow speed of walking, we'll just drop the settings down, turn off the frame rate cap, and your running speed will be twice as fast.
Yeah, and just like ignore that game design.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you know, with their VATS targeting stuff, where it kind of goes into pseudo turn-based combat thing, it's like you can still play the game. You know, it'd be hard if you were trying to play it all real time, and all of a sudden everything were running 100% faster. But you know, whatever.
Has the game been buggy? I've seen some weird glitches online.
I honestly haven't played far enough to really come up with any statement on that. I mean, I basically ran through the initial vault and got outside and started benchmarking. So, you know, and it's funny because like I've seen some benchmarks where I'm pretty sure the people ran the benchmarks inside the vault, and frame rates are much higher when you're indoors than outdoors. So,
Sure.
You know, as soon as you step outside, which is where a lot of the game will likely take place, your frame rates are going to drop by about 30-40%.
Has Bethesda improved their faces? That's like one of my biggest complaints with Bethesda games is that their faces, especially women, look awful.
So at the beginning of the game, you have your character, and you can also customize your wife, who, spoiler, she dies. But I mean, like, it's literally like 2 minutes into the game, right? And it's like, so I'm like, why did you even customize her, right? I guess it's your spouse, so you can choose to play a male or a female. So whichever you don't play, presumably the other one gets killed. But I remember I just kind of went with one of the default faces, and then when I entered the game proper, I'm like, man, she's kind of ugly.
Yeah.
Jared, we're going to disconnect you off the podcast now.
Tom's mad.
Because I spoiled
this dirty look. You can't see it, but he gave this dirty look like, oh, he just ruined Fallout for me.
Yeah,
It
like,
happened in the first...
I spoiled the first 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right, I think Jared, you know, since you're already talking, you also wanted to talk a little bit about SSDs.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Why don't you go ahead?
I'm gonna keep this brief. So, like, just on the high level, like SSDs use NAND, your flash memory, and what they've usually done is originally it was SLC memory, single level cell, and then they started doing MLC, which it stood for multi-level cell, but really what it meant was 2 bits per cell. And now we're seeing TLC, which is triple level cell, where they're storing 3 bits per cell. And so that means like SLC was you had 2 voltage states you needed to track. MLC is 4 voltage states, and TLC is 8 voltage states. And so it becomes more complex to track, but it also decreases the cost because essentially with MLC, you get twice the capacity per cell. So, you know, if you had a 128 gig SLC drive, well, that can become a 256 gig MLC drive, or if you wanted, you could potentially make it into a 384 gig TLC drive, something like that, right? Well, TLC has been around for a long time. It's used in a lot of these USB flash memory sticks. It can be pretty slow, but with a better controller, it could be faster, right? So Samsung was first out of the gate with their 840 EVO, and even though it used TLC memory, it was still pretty fast. Well, more recently, the other companies are coming out with their TLC drives. And it's really interesting because Samsung is now on their second generation TLC with the 850 EVO. And at higher capacities, like the 2 terabyte drive, I haven't written up the review, but here's a spoiler for that. The 2 terabyte 850 EVO and the 2 terabyte 850 Pro, the performance in so many respects is almost identical. So even though one's MLC and one of them is TLC, Samsung has made their TLC drive nearly as fast as the other. And it's like, well, great. Why would you even buy the more expensive drive? So then you flip over to the competition, and their TLC controllers right now, I hesitate to say that they suck, but they're substantially slower than Samsung's 840 EVO, let alone the 850 EVO. And it's really interesting to me to see, like, what is it that Samsung apparently got right that no one else can get. So, I mean, that's kind of it. So Crucial now has their BX200 that's using TLC memory. There's the Corsair Neutron XT, I think uses the Phison S10 controller and TLC memory. And there's, I reviewed the OCZ Trion 100, which used the Phison controller and TLC memory. And it's like, performance isn't like so bad that you can't use it. It's still better than a hard drive. But, you know, when you compare it to the Samsung 850 EVO, it's like, that's what everyone needs to at least come close to matching, or else beat it on price. And so I mentioned Crucial's BX200 definitely beats it on price, but the performance it's way off target. So it's kind of like, well, would you double your performance for, 10% more money? I think most people would.
I would. But that's the thing about Samsung being an SSD company, right? Because they control the whole stack, from the firmware to the hardware to the NAND to the packaging, everything.
Right, right. But we're talking about Crucial here. Crucial, is a division of Micron. They make NAND. They make their own controller. So it's like, I don't know if it's the NAND or if it's the controller or if it's both, but,
But ultimately, the product isn't as good as Samsung's equivalent.
Yeah. Samsung's like, it used to be like Intel was the 800-pound gorilla of the PC space. Samsung's the 800-pound gorilla of the SSD space. Like, it's really, really hard for people to beat Samsung.
Well, I can't wait for the 3D XPoint to see. We haven't really talked about that too much, but that's, a technology from Intel and Micron, in which they are stating that it's up to 1,000 times faster than traditional NAND.
Yeah, it's interesting, but you don't right now. That type of speed is kind of pointless. You don't have a bus that can really transfer it. I mean, PCIe will even top out. If you've got a drive that runs faster than the PCIe, there's really no point in buying it. It's kind of a waste of the performance.
Well, XPoint is almost answering the question, like, if you had infinitely fast storage performance, where's the next big bottleneck? Because, like Alex said, the bus connection, so on your Z170 chipset, it's a 32 gigabit per second bus. And, your fastest SSDs right now, like our M.2, are basically pushing 16 gigabits from like the 950 Pro or whatever. And so we're already using half of that bus speed. Even if we're not 1,000 times faster with XPoint, like let's say it's only 10 times faster, well, that still exceeds the chipset bus width or speed by a good margin. So it's like, well, if we're saturating things and going faster, if they come anywhere near to 10 or 20 or 100 times faster, then effectively storage just becomes like, hey, you can use your storage as main memory or whatever. Now it's all up to your processor and your graphics and your other stuff to keep pace.
Maybe we could see PCIe Gen 4.
Yeah. Probably.
Yeah, I mean, we could see that. we could also see maybe use more PCIe lanes for storage, and because right now I think if we use multiple PCIe lanes, that way would get more bandwidth, but you'd basically chew up all these lanes, so you wouldn't be able to have big SLI solutions and have big storage solutions. You'd have to kind of choose between one or the other if you did it that way.
And here's the dirty little secret. It's like, with SSDs, there's a huge jump going from hard drive to solid state drive, but even going from a moderate SSD, like the 850 EVO isn't exactly a bad SSD, but it's on the SATA bus, right? You go from an 850 EVO to the fastest PCI Express based M.2 drive, like the SM951 or the 950 Pro, or Intel's SSD 750, whatever you want to throw out there. It's like certain things will become faster, but your overall user experience is like, well, actually, if you're just using the web and such, having a faster SSD doesn't really help much. It's like any SSD it fixes the storage bottleneck, and so everything else is like, it's mostly for the enterprise is what it becomes.
Sure. All right, moving on. Alex, we didn't get to talk about this earlier when Alex, it was last month that you went to Oculus Connect?
Yeah, it was it last month? No, it might have been.
Was it October, right?
Yeah, it was early October. We didn't get a chance to talk to it again because of the move. So we were, the whole office was packing up for the move. And you and I, we sat down. We did have a little bit of a debate about the nature and the use of VR and different type of experiences you could have.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about this. Was maybe a couple weeks ago, but I was a little bit. So Oculus has their own movie studio. I forget what it's called. It's their own basically.
Yeah, they had
Pixar thing.
Yeah, they had it in at Oculus Connect. They had this demo called Henry, and it's basically a hedgehog, and it's imagine kind of a Pixar short. And it was kind of like that, but it was within VR. Mm-hmm. So there's no interaction. You're just kind of like a fly on the wall watching this scene occur around you.
Yeah. So what my beef with it was, it wasn't, to me, maybe it's just a tech demo. And to be fair, I haven't tried it out. But to me, just like hearing people describe it, it wasn't, like, it seems, I'm sure it's like a fun, like a little thing and it's like cool story or characters or whatever. But to me, it wasn't very forward-thinking. Like, it was, as I understand it, it's like you're inside of a house with this hedgehog, and it's sort of like you're inside this house of this Pixar short, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a little Pixar short. And it's not very interactive beyond maybe he looks at you or something like that, right? And I don't know, maybe it lasts 5 minutes or something, and then it ends. To me, it wasn't forward-looking because, like, you could... Like, that experience isn't that much better to me than like just watching it on TV. I think you should leverage the medium's strengths and have it, a little bit more interactive or immersive. And I'm not saying that there isn't room for like movie-like experiences or things like that. But I equated it to like when film first started out. When film just started out, it was essentially a camera just filming a play, like a theater play. And then, they eventually learned that, like, oh, there's something called editing, which we can do time skips and we can, like, do things out of order, like if you watch Pulp Fiction, or you can have, like, 3 different story arcs happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I was like, like, they should do stuff like that, or, like, maybe the interactive experience of it would just be like, okay, like, there's 2 different branch ways that you can go, right? Two different characters that you could follow. Just look at who you want to follow. Like, both of them are extending their hands out to you. And then they're like, follow me. Like, I'm the good guy. And the other guy's like, no, I'm the good guy. And then you get to choose. And then you get to go along that journey. And you don't have to hold a controller. You just look at who you want to follow, right? Yeah. And then you can watch it again and then check out the other guy's thing and see how the story unfolds from that direction. I think that leverages the medium strengths a little bit more. So it was, this is just a tech demo, so maybe I was being too harsh. But I don't know. It's just like, oh, like this isn't really much better than something I could watch on an HD TV.
Yeah, the thing about Henry is that they made it Oculus One. They released all the assets and everything, so content creators could actually use it as a guideline or to see how they did it. It's kind of like I likened it to like a code example when you're learning a programming language. You don't necessarily use that program. You wouldn't use like a simple beginner's program in listing people in a class or something. Like it's kind of useless every day, but it does show you how things work. It shows you how the assets work together, what types of things are possible. And there are, like you said, VR is an interesting thing because it's not just a gaming peripheral, and I think a lot of people may think of it as that first, because
it's a whole system ecosystem,
right?
Whole new language.
Yeah, I talked to someone who's director over at Penrose Studios, and I saw his VR experience. It's kind of the same thing, short film. It was based on the Little Prince, animation that they created, and he looks at it as though it's a whole new medium, just like film is as different from theater, VR is from film. But you can still tell a similar type of story and use it in a similar way, but it is a different medium. So it lends itself to different things. And there's kind of a continuum of no interaction from like Henry or like his VR film, which was completely non-interactive. It was just you're watching it, which was it was kind of cool. Actually, I really liked it though.
You're supposed to hate it.
Yeah, you're supposed to hate it. No, The Little Prince is a cute story. So it goes from zero interaction all the way to full interaction, like a game, right? Like Eve Valkyrie, full interaction, full immersion. But in the middle, there's this kind of weird gray area where there's a lot of playroom. At Oculus Connect, there was also Lucasfilm, and ILM. They did a presentation on the types of tools they're using to tell immersive short stories and different things that they're doing using VR. And one of them was they showed this short film that was supposed to be in VR, right? But they showed it obviously in 2D because we didn't have VR headsets. But you saw this scene and you followed along these stormtroopers. Scenes opens, you see stormtroopers, they're on patrol, what looks like Tatooine or whatever, and they go walking off, and then you find R2D2, C3PO come out of a building or hut, and they scamper off in the opposite direction, and there's a battle happening in the distance, and then they run into Boba Fett at the end of it. So it's kind of an interesting short. You're like, oh, okay, this seems like typical Star Wars. But then he backs it up, and then he looks at the stormtroopers, but then he changes camera angles, right? So it's basically like you can move around within the environment. So you change camera angle, and then in another instance, he restarts the scene, but starts it with the droids instead of the stormtroopers. So you see what the droids are actually doing before they come out of the hut. Right.
So,
and
are you choosing what you see, or is it like a path that like a linear path?
It's more like you can choose what you see in the environment. Okay. So there are certain assets, obviously, they're going to be higher quality or lower quality based on their importance in the scene. Because if you had to render everything at super high resolution, high quality textures, high quality geometry for this big expansive set that you could move freely around in, it would be really expensive. So they have to kind of decide they have to prioritize what assets are the most important and what can kind of, be slightly lower quality in order to, get things to work a little smoother. But it was kind of like this interesting halfway point in between zero interaction and 100% like game-like interaction. So it kind of filled in that gap in between Henry and a VR game as we've, come to know them. So I think that VR is going to be very interesting, and I think that that Facebook buying Oculus is actually a really forward-thinking event, because VR isn't just going to be about gaming. It's going to be about a wide array of content. I mean, they've got on the Gear VR, you can watch Twitch with friends in a virtual room, which is kind of weird at first, but I mean, I can see where some people who, if you're really into Twitch and your friends are into Twitch, it could be an interesting experience. You can watch Netflix on a virtual big screen, in a virtual living room, which is kind of interesting. So there's a lot of different things you can do, and the Gear VR especially is a consumer device, so it's not going to be a high-end gaming device that you're going to need, a GTX 970 to use. It runs on your phone. It's $100. It's coming out in 9 days. And it's a very interesting entry point to VR for the mass market. So I think that, my mom's not going to play Eve Valkyrie, but she might watch something in VR. She might watch a VR experience. She might watch a VR film. Or if the New York Times, for instance, set up VR cameras, like a 360 camera, and filmed something in, I don't know, some remote place, she might watch that.
Yeah. So yesterday, actually, just on that topic, yesterday, NVIDIA invited me out to an event in the city, and I got to check out this is actually running on the Vive, but it was an Everest demo. So using thousands and thousands of high-res images, I think a Swedish developer was able to remap Everest accurately. So they basically transported you to the peak of the mountain, so you can walk around and things like that, and then you can sort of teleport along the mountain as well. And it was rendered 3D rendered, so it wasn't the images. So they just recreated it, so it was interactive, and you could walk across little bridges and things like that. And it was very weird because I remember asking the PR guy, I'm like, how do you define this? Is this a game? Is this a movie? Because it doesn't feel like either. It feels like something that's sort of in between. You could walk around, so it was a little bit more active than a traditional movie or something like that, but you didn't really have to. It just added to the experience. And it was the first time, I tried out tons of VR demos before, but it was the first time that so I climbed up this ladder that was on the side of the mountain, and you can look down. And I remember looking down. I was and I asked them. I was what happens if I walk over the ledge? And the guy was go ahead and try out and see what happens. And it was the first time that I was legitimately scared. I've never and I've tried other demos where you're on top of a building and then you just step off or whatever. It's okay. I think with Oculus, but I think the movement of the Vive really adds to it that you can walk around this area. And also I was afraid because I was worried that they were going to animate you falling off a mountain, and they didn't. You ended up just floating in midair, walking on the sky. But that was something that I was legitimately worried about. I was please don't drop me.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the most compelling things about VR also is that I think when it's clearly a game, we know that it's a game, we can call it that. But I think for this gray area where it's not quite a film, but you're not really interacting that much, or that you're just walking around, but it's not really game-like, there's no game mechanics. I don't think we have a vocabulary to accurately describe it yet.
Experience is the closest thing.
Yeah, really. Everyone calls it VR experience, but no one really knows what exactly is this.
Well, I think the problem with VR as a whole, as it stands today, is that we're all trying to take mediums that have existed for decades and maybe even more than that, and wedge that into this new thing, this new experience. And I call it a thing because it really is a thing. I feel like we haven't really discovered what VR can truly be yet. That whatever it is that we're going to create down the future and how we're going to do it, that's going to give us that mind-blowing experience, we haven't figured that out yet. Right. Now we're just taking movies, which has been around since forever, or we're taking a game, since everybody knows the game format.
Right.
Whether it's FPS or a 3D platformer or flight sim, these have all been done. Now it's just done in 3D.
Yeah.
And it's just when 3D was all the rage in theaters and TVs, 3D TV. Mm-hmm. Everybody was trying to do 3D, and then it just died because it's taking an old format and then just adding just a little bit to it. Right. And it's not completely new, but I think there's so much potential for VR to be completely new. We just haven't figured out that thing.
I think the closest analog you can have to it is think back to when film was new. back then, like Jimmy said, they're filming stage plays or they're doing very simple things. Like that old film where they would have the train coming at the screen. People in the theater would duck because they didn't realize that, it's just a film. In the VR, you kind of have that same experience. But in the same way that no one really knew what film could be, no one knew that you could have an Avatar or a Pulp Fiction. No one knew that you could do these things with film back then. We don't know how far VR can go, and it is so much more of a rich medium because it's so encompassing. It's so enveloping, and it gives you that sense of place and presence. Just as much. I mean, if you think about a film, it's still 24 frames a second in a box. Games we play are 30, 60, 120 frames per second in a box. Yeah. It's still a square. Yeah. This is there's no box. The box is gone. Right. You're literally inside of it. So that opens up a whole new way of thinking that I think a lot of people are having a hard time wrapping their head around because there's no analog to it anywhere else in the world besides your actual experience.
But that's the thing. Like, because you mentioned about removing the box, the constraint. Yeah. With the thing that's being done now with movie studios, trying to make like a VR movie experience, it's still constrained.
Right. That's what I was getting at when we were talking about.
It's not that big leap yet. It's just another like step.
Yeah.
In something that's already like.
Well, you have a real challenge. I mean, think about it. If you can look in any direction, how do you move your camera? Right. But if you have a crew there. If you look around, you'll see the crew.
Right.
You can't set up lighting. Right. You'll see the lights.
So maybe the thing is movies aren't the thing that's gonna usher in that crazy VR experience.
I think things like Henry or it
has to be fully animated stuff.
Right. It has to be fully animated or the alternative. I mean, I do see a point where you can use VR video. There was an example, and I heard this on NPR. Basically, the UN, they went to Syria they went to a Syrian refugee camp, and they took this camera rig and they filmed and interviewed kids who were living in these camps, and they showed it to world leaders and people who were in charge of things, and they said it really, really touched them. Like some people were crying because it gives you that sense of presence. Like in a film, it's harder. You have to work really hard to invoke empathy, right? Because your brain is still going, oh, that's a screen there. It's inside a box. Right. It's not real. In VR, if you're watching a film and you look around and you're surrounded by the rest of the refugee camp, you are in the refugee camp. Right. It's enough to fool It's enough to you can think to yourself and say, oh, I'm not really here. But it's enough to fool all of your other senses into telling your body you're there.
So I have a question for the both of you.
Oh, is Jared still there?
Oh, I'm still here.
Did we lose Jared?
I don't know. Did we lose Jared?
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Jared?
Sorry, I muted my phone. I'm still talking.
Okay.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Twan.
So I have a question. So just to clarify, is this podcast rated G? PG-13 or R or
I think
no, it's just, historically
if you listen to some of the samples from Gordon, they're definitely not rated G.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and say this.
Go for it.
Jared's rated G.
Recently,
just don't kill my earbuds or my ears.
Yeah, recently I had the chance to try out VR porn.
I've heard about this.
Okay. So,
what?
You knew it was going to happen, guys.
Come on. So everybody talks about how
I wish we had
porn,
more time.
And actually, porn does it's very influential on the technology.
That's why VHS won.
Yes. So VR porn. My friend let me try it on his DK2.
Your friend.
My friend. So my friend, he was visiting.
Okay.
He had a DK2 with him, and he was like, "Hey, do you have VR porn? Have you ever tried it?" I'm like, "No, but I'm totally interested in the experience." I mean, just to find out, you know,
sure,
what it's like. So it's interesting because there's 2 prominent studios that do VR porn right now, and they're all filmed in the same exact way. So
these are filmed; they're not rendered like.
No, these are real actors and stuff like that. So because a lot of movement in VR space makes people sick.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really, the actors can't do crazy movements because that you're sitting there or whatever, you know, you're stationary. And so a lot of movement in an activity such as making a porn video could make people sick. That's not the experience that the studios want, obviously. So
it's not like it's a freaking roller coaster. Like, how are you getting sick?
Well, the bobbing and
yeah, I can see that. I mean, even something as simple as having the camera move as if you're walking and you're standing still.
Yes.
Even if you're not sick, it can make you feel. There's a weird disconnect.
Yes.
Okay. It's a disassociative experience, which is uncomfortable to me. Okay.
So how they filmed this was it's a male actor. You're in the point of view of a male actor, and he's sitting on a couch. So his hands are by his side. He's sitting on the couch, and there's a female actress in front of you, you know, doing her performance. Mm-hmm. On you, and the guy who's in the video, and you don't obviously it's like disembodied, but you kind of see yourself in that position. You're just sitting there not doing anything, and the crazy thing is, okay, the DK2 is low resolution, so you have the screen door effect, so it supposedly takes away from the reality experience of it, but oddly enough, I felt like that person was literally on my lap in front of me, to the point where I started feeling like I was cheating on my girlfriend.
Wow.
So it was convincing enough.
Yes, it was convincing enough that I started to feel guilty that I was in this experience because it was close enough to reach out.
That's crazy.
And it there was a presence of somebody.
You should write a story about this.
I should.
I think I did see another. This has been written about online, and I think they describe the same thing, that it's disconcerting because if you're in a relationship, you're like, you have this weird sense of intimacy with someone who's not really there, but you're convinced they're there.
Right.
So it triggers all these chemicals in your head that goes, uh-oh, I shouldn't be doing this.
No, I literally felt like I was like,
it just occurred to me that like this could be like, this could be the next thing for swingers, right? It's like,
well, it could be that
a social thing.
I mean, also you have to consider that, when I was playing with Medium, and I think you played with or Wes, you weren't there. Wes, he played with Medium as well.
PC Gamer.
A PC Gamer, Wes Finland. We went and played, or didn't really play. We did the Medium experience, right?
Right.
Where it's basically 3D sculpt, or it's a virtual reality sculpting, but the other person is there with you in VR.
Yes.
So you actually see a kind of a disembodied head with 2 hands, but
you still feel like there's somebody there, right?
You're convinced that someone's in the room with you. You interact like I looked at her her face where her eyes would be. We'd wave, we'd laugh,
right?
And it was that convincing. So there is a little bit of a conundrum. It's like, if this turns into a social tool, is virtual cheating really cheating? Is it because it's virtual intimacy we're talking about now?
Yeah, and that's a whole other topic.
Right. But I'm talking about it's the next. I mean, it's a step that Facebook as a web app could never ever be.
Right.
And it'll give you that sense of presence with, it doesn't have to be a sexual experience. It could be with friends doing anything else. You could,
right.
Like I said, watching Twitch together, that's interesting. Right. Being able to maybe watch Netflix together. So
the key was that I really felt like there was another person there. And that is one of the killer apps for VR, is to make you feel like you're with someone else.
It's a social thing, right?
Like in whatever circumstances,
Right.
okay? Like visiting your friend or family or whatever, or VR porn in this case. So just to round off the topic, I felt like, when the female actress was there, I felt like I was actually cheating on my girlfriend. Then another female actress came into the scene. And then I was like, this is awesome.
So like basically once you cross the threshold of like, no, I shouldn't. Oh, I should. I totally should.
Oh man. So yeah, that does raise some ethical questions. It's like I'm not sure if this will actually manifest its way in positive or negative ways because we really don't know what this medium...
with technology, there's ups and downs.
Right. I think the key takeaway from it is that we don't know what kinds of goods or ills will come out of it. Just like we didn't know with radio or television or movies or anything else. It's completely an unknown, and it can really go either way.
It's up to the user.
It's up to the user. It's up to the content creators. Right. It's up to what we as a society decide to make it. But now it is a thing. Before VR wasn't really a thing. Now it's kind of like a genie that's slowly being let out of the bottle. And then once all these headsets come online, I think that the media landscape is going to change dramatically and very quickly. And people, I think, underestimate VR by thinking, oh, it's just a gaming peripheral. If you think that, then you're not understanding what VR can do. You have a very, very narrow scope, view of what's possible with this. Because you play video games on your PC or on your console on your TV. But what can those devices also do? Right? They can do a vast array of other things, and it's still a similar medium. So I think that's very interesting thing I took away from Oculus, because I went there thinking, oh, this is going to be great. There's going to be a lot of game demos. And I saw all these things that weren't games, and that interested me way more than, playing a Valkyrie demo for the umpteenth time, which is awesome. Don't get me wrong. There's, your childish dream of flying a starfighter and, being in a gunfight in outer space is amazing. That's great. But there's, what really got my mind going was all these other implications and all these other things you can do with the medium that aren't necessarily gameplay related.
Yep. Yeah. We live in pretty crazy times.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to move it on to the last topic, which is the Steam controller. I'm going to hold it up to the camera right now. And I just, I'm going to pass that around. I just reviewed it, and I gave it 7.5 out of 10. And I was looking at some of the other reviews online, and I noticed that the controller has a lot of hate. I don't know if you guys have held it before, but it's a very strange controller. So instead of, if you've never seen it before, I'm holding a picture of it in front of the camera too. Maybe they can add it in the edit. But there's like two circular touch pads. It sort of looks like an owl. At the the middle bottom has like your traditional joystick with your A, B, X, Y buttons. But it's the touch pads that really make it different. So the right touchpad is primarily used as essentially it replaces your mouse. And I've actually been looking forward to the Steam machines for a really long time. I know, Tuan, you were actually essentially working to release them when you were with Dead by Power. It's been delayed for a long time, and I've been really enthusiastic about it. Pretty huge fan of everything that Valve has done up until this point. When I first got it, first unboxed it, plugged it in, I hated it. It felt really awkward and alien to me. Definitely still not perfect, but after pouring in several hours into it, you reach a tipping point where you just get it and it clicks. And now I'm convinced that a top player using this will destroy an Xbox controller player. He won't be able to beat a top tier keyboard mouse player, but a top tier Steam controller player could be competitive with everyday keyboard mouse users, I think. But from reading online, people just think it's awkward, weird, unnecessary, and I don't mean to criticize, but I feel like these people haven't really tried it enough, because you have to put in several hours to do it. And I know that Valve is going to work with GameStop and have these controllers and kiosks and things like that. And I think that's the worst the worst situation to show it in because
when you're in a GameStop, you're there.
Yeah.
You're gonna touch it for like 5 minutes. Like,
you're like, what is this? I'm gonna go back. So how I think I read another article. I think Tanya shared it in one of the chat rooms. I don't remember which site it was, but
with Engadget.
Okay,
yeah,
maybe. So then they said like we hate it because it's weird or something like that.
Oh, that would be
Well, I can tell you immediately why some people hate it. It's because the A, B, X, Y buttons, normally like on an Xbox controller, are a little further up on the right.
Sure.
And then where your trackpad, which is basically a replacement for the right joystick, is up where those buttons should be. So you're basically inverting those two places, and people are so used to the Xbox controller that of course it's going to feel weird.
Yeah. So you do have triggers, extra triggers on the back too, so you don't have to like go down here so much. You can just like click on the back.
Yeah. You have 6 total triggers on the back side.
Yeah. So there's ways around that. But the thing that's weird about this is it can emulate like a trackball or like a mouse or like a controller. So it just feels like the Wild West of controls. Like there's different presets out there, and it's like a box of chocolates. Like you never know what you're gonna get.
Well, and the other thing is because it's new and it's not familiar, and that's why people, I think, don't like it.
Let me interrupt with something. Who here remembers the Space Orb? Did anyone ever try a Space Orb? Like this
Space Orb?
It goes way back.
I'm gonna Google that.
This is 1996. So I was in college, and I had a roommate, and we were playing Quake, and this guy was, I don't know if he was like top tier, but he smoked everyone that I knew, and he played with this stupid peripheral called a Space Orb, and it was like a 6 degrees of freedom, like you'd twist and manipulate this little ball on the controller.
Oh, it was white, and you put
like
your
a
hand
trackball.
into it, right?
Yeah, I mean,
it looks black according to this one. I don't know if that's the one that he's.
Yeah, it was black.
The Wikipedia page.
So the thing is, like, his name's Lance Clark. Hi, if you're listening, Lance. And he totally like smoked me and my roommates. And when he was on a mouse and keyboard, he was better than me. But with his Space Orb, he just like absolutely annihilated us. And the problem.
So you're saying he was actually better than mouse and keyboard with this device?
Yeah, but the learning curve on that thing was crazy. Like he let me try it, and I got sick to my stomach because I would just like. You'd try and tweak it a little bit, and you'd end up looking at the floor or looking at the ceiling or just moving wrong. And he said, I mean, he put hours into it. So I throw that out there, and then let me say, like, I've done ergonomic keyboards, not like Microsoft Natural, but the really funky ones like the Kinesis Advantage or the ErgoDox keyboards, or I've done several of these, the Tech, and they look like a pretty not too crazy keyboard, and then you start typing on them, and if you're a fast typist, like muscle memory means a lot. And all of a sudden, like I went from 60-70 words per minute when I first got on a Kinesis Advantage to like 5 words per minute because I was making so many mistakes, and it took probably a couple of days of use to get there. So I think there's definitely something to be said for, I think Jimmy was saying, how you got to adapt to it. And once you do, there's going to be people, I think, that will end up way better than they were with their previous device. Now, whether they can top a keyboard and mouse, I don't know. We might need a different controller to do that. But anything's possible given enough time and practice, right?
Yeah, I could totally imagine like a savant being like, "This is for me. This is what I've been waiting for." For me though, it reminds me a lot of I'm probably gonna butcher this pronunciation. Dvorak. That keyboard. So it reminds me a lot of that because like just like the potential to type on that is much greater in terms of speed than a traditional QWERTY keyboard, which is what like 99.9% of all of us use. But like, so if you're willing to learn that system, you could really fly. But most people that's really inconvenient to relearn, right? So I feel like the Steam controller is sort of in that similar boat right now.
I don't think it's that. I mean, just
it's
holding
not,
it for
maybe not that crazy, but
right. It's not that crazy. It doesn't fundamentally change everything. I mean, the trackpad, because you brought it in the office and turned it on. I actually got to use it. One thing that I think is lost is on a lot of people just looking at it is that trackpad's actually, it gives you like a tactile feedback. So when you move your thumb on it, you feel like, it gives you a little bit of feedback so you're moving your finger, right? So, I mean, that helps. So it just doesn't feel like some awkward thing. And also the button layout's different. I mean, me personally, I've never liked any controller. Like Xbox controllers are not my favorite thing. I don't really like PS, 3 or 4 controllers either. I really, really love my mice and keyboards. But, I think some people might take to it. Other people might not. I think that, controller design has evolved a lot. I mean, some people swore by like the X64 or the N64 controller. I thought it was silly. So,
the stick coming down the middle.
Yeah, the stick coming down the middle is like, some people could play games. I could not play any games on that. I looked at it, I'm like, I don't know what this is for. So, I mean, never underestimate the ability for people to adapt, especially gamers who are looking for an edge. I think that there's plenty of room for people to try it, and if it flops, I don't think it's the world's biggest hit for Valve, honestly. I mean, they've got so many other things going on. They've got Steam Link, they've got Steam streaming and other things going, and Steam machines that are supposed to be coming out. So the controller is kind of like supposed to be, to me, seems more like an icing on the cake, is something that fits within their ecosystem. But if you can find another controller,
you don't have to use their controller.
Right. So you still have a choice. It's just like they give you. It's like, hey, here's our version. But if you don't like it, you can get someone else's version. I mean, the console market is rife with aftermarket available controllers. It's just full of them. So if you really don't like that controller, you still have choice, which I think isn't a bad thing. I think even if it flops, that good on them for trying to innovate on that.
So the interesting thing about this controller is that it is being built as a controller that is backwards compatible with the entire existing Steam library. So you can play like a strategy game with it that doesn't support a traditional Xbox controller. I tried playing Dota with it. It worked. It's very strange, and I definitely prefer keyboard and mouse. But you can't do that with an Xbox controller. So there's an argument for the controller in that scenario. But actually, at the core of what the controller is, I actually like it. There is a really steep learning curve, but my problems with it mostly pertain to the ecosystem, because Valve isn't really making pre-made presets for different games that are out there. They're relying on the community to make it, and then like the highest rated community made preset will be the default control scheme for whatever game that is you're playing. So I reviewed it when like there weren't that many people that had it. So a lot of games were lacking presets, even Team Fortress. And so I mean there are some generic presets like this is gonna emulate a Xbox controller or something like that. So you try it and it actually ends up working okay, but it's like there are no buttons to like switch characters or classes. Mm-hmm. Or they'll be like press Q, and then it's like, well, what's Q on this controller? Because it's like mapped to like keyboard, and then you find out like after scratching your head for 2 minutes, there is no Q that's mapped even. So there's a bunch of things like that where it's like this feels very jerry rigged, and yeah, that was my biggest issue with it actually. But I think that's something that can that they can fix over time.
Yeah, that's kind of like a software implementation issue that is just a matter, like you said, of just getting those mappings out. And I think that developing hardware and testing hardware is a much longer, harder road than just getting mappings done properly.
But at the same time, like you can fix some of it, but it's like, let's say it's trying to emulate a keyboard. That's the way to play this particular game. And it's saying like press WASD or whatever. If the game is old, how are you going to ever change that so that it's like press the back button on the Steam controller? Like you can't. It's always going to be sloppy, right?
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for Valve for that. But anyways, I just wanted to comment on some of the reviews out there. It's getting a really negative. It's getting a lot of negative press. I think if you are willing to put the time into the controller to learn to sort of tame its wildness, it has a ton of potential. It might not be for everybody, But if you're interested, it's $50. Not perfect, but you can check it out. It's not too expensive.
Yeah, it's not bad for a controller considering other controllers on the market. So,
all right. So we're just gonna move on to some reader questions. We have a couple here. So I think this one's probably best suited for Tuan, maybe. Ken Middleholtz asks, do you really believe that the website has been improved since it has switched from the old format? I'm sorry, but it seems unorganized, and articles, stories, reviews, etc. are scattered all over. Also, it's difficult to find any of the old podcasts. Please fix it.
Some of that observation is true, and some of it is not. Technically speaking, the carousel, the thing that moves at the top when you can click and go to the next feature story, and the whole left side of the page is exactly what the old MaximumPC.com was. And everything on the left side of the page moves in chronological order. It just, the old stuff goes down the page, and that's it. The middle column is old features. So whatever gets removed from the carousel that you see at the top flows through the middle column, and then the third column on the right is really old news. So in that regard, I think it's organized. It is true that some things are more difficult to find, such as if you wanted to find the RSS feed or find social, or maybe even just want to find more about the team. Some people didn't realize that there was a more info button at the bottom of the right.
Yeah, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's like a little plus symbol. You click on it, it expands.
Yeah, it's at the bottom of the page because it auto.
I have to say, like, when I first found out about that little plus button, I didn't know about it either, and that was like several months into it. I'm like, oh, we have this button.
In my experience, though, no website design or redesign is ever perfect, and there's always some sort of gripe that people have. It's just impossible to please everybody's unique needs and wants for a design. It's sometimes it's just subjective, and I think website design can be like clothing, and it's very personal.
I'm naked most of the time, so what does that mean in my analogy?
I guess you just like to read raw HTML.
That's just how we roll at home, man.
Feed.
Don't judge.
Yeah.
Okay. And we are going to be, I think, making some minor tweaks down the road.
Yeah, we're continuing to make minor tweaks. There's some things that are there right now that people might not have noticed, but it makes it easier for us to produce content or highlight certain stuff more clearly. And then we're going through the web team is still continually improving stuff, and we might have more significant improvements. At the beginning of next year.
And also, by the way, on topic of podcast, we're also on iTunes. You can get us there if you don't like iTunes. The last couple years I've been on YouTube. So, all right, next question actually comes from a Maximum PC freelancer. Sho Kikugawa asks, what is your take on the latest Apple SoC benchmarks? Supposedly, according to Geekbench results, the A9 can go toe-to-toe with Intel's Core M. Is it really fair to make these claims when it's iOS versus Windows? As much as I want to believe SoCs have gotten this far, I really think Apple is just skewing the playing field to make themselves look better as usual.
I know that this is kind of a Jared question, so I'll defer to him in a minute. But I think he shows completely right that, I mean, if you're taking iOS and trying to bench it against something that's running a full desktop OS, it's going to be it's not apples to apples. So it's not an apples to apples like comparison. Like we would never do that in a benchmark, for instance. So I think that's kind of the crux there. But I think Jared's probably got more Intel, not to use a pun, Intel on the architectures than anyone else.
I'm sure Jared has a follow up to this. I'm just going to quickly chime in before I forget. So I think. So this is something that Gordon mentioned before. Geekbench is largely known as a mobile benchmark, and it's fairly new to the scene. It's not, as far as I know, it hasn't been around as long as like 3D Mark or something like that. And even like 3D Mark, like back in its early days or the early PC benchmarks back in the 90s, a lot of them were just skewed. So we could be in that state right now with mobile. It's sort of the Wild West out there right now. So I just want to add that. Unless Jared knows better, I don't know if maybe Geekbench is super reliable. I don't know.
No, it's
But I'm gonna go ahead.
totally not.
I'm gonna go ahead and unleash the Jared. So Jared, go ahead.
So there's lies, there's damned lies, and then there's benchmarks, right? No, I mean everything tells you something about a CPU architecture or whatever, a core architecture. But Geekbench it's kind of like comparing Spec Int or Spec FP or whatever scores. Like it tells you something, but if you don't know what that something really means, you might draw wrong conclusions. So if you're going to compare Geekbench of an iOS test versus a Windows test, it's like, well, Geekbench, unless it's changed since I last looked at it, it ran a lot in the L1, L2 cache of the CPU, which means, the whole memory hierarchy kind of like, hey, it doesn't matter how much memory you've got or how fast your DDR3, DDR4 memory is, because it's only going to hit the L1 cache, and it's kind of this theoretical best case. So that said, Apple's gotten really good at making SoCs. Like, I would love to see an Android tablet or an Android phone running off their new A9, A9X chips. Because right now they're beating Qualcomm's Snapdragon stuff, and they're beating everyone. And are they competitive with Intel's Core M? You gotta remember what Core M is. Core M is like, it's your core architecture dropped to 2 cores with hyper-threading and clocked down to about 1/3 of what we run on a lot of desktops and laptops, with the ability to boost faster for a little while. And so, depending on how the benchmark runs, you might actually be able to match up with Core M, and it's not that far-fetched, because they're now on, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know that Apple has actually said what the A9 is built on, but I think it might be a 14 nanometer process. It might be 16 nanometer, but it's not that far off of Intel's 14 nanometer stuff. So when you start throwing all that stuff together, it's like, you can come pretty close to Intel in certain instances. Like, you're still not going to match them if you're trying to compare it against a desktop that's got a 130 watt CPU in it. But for doing specific tasks, yeah, the A9 is a good chip, and I'm not going to diss it and say that it's bad. Apple, of course, they're a great marketing company, so they probably chose Geekbench for a reason. There's a lot of benchmarks they could have run. Why don't they show this whole slew of benchmarks? Well, because they only want to look at the best case, probably.
Oh, okay. Moving on, next question. KC Asvit from Twitter asks, is there anything we can do about the recent trend of poor PC ports? Other than, I think, just don't buy them, right?
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
they frustrate me too, and I've written editorials about it. But
the reader must be talking about Batman.
Batman. I mean, some people are frustrated with Fallout, to be honest.
Oh.
Maybe not to the same fervor as Batman, but I mean, do you guys have any better ideas? I try calling them out when I see them. It frustrates me too. I'm one of you guys. I'm a PC gamer.
Well, I think yeah, the media and user base and social media world calling developers out is definitely the way to go about it, because that made Warner Brothers, refund everybody who bought the game on Steam.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's definitely the better
scenario
of the two evils. But then ultimately, it's like, if I paid $50-$60 for the game, like, I want to play that game.
Right.
I don't want a fucked up experience.
Well, I think in Warner Brothers' case, that was a big example and kind of like a wake up call for a lot of developers to see that and realize.
But things like SimCity, I mean, these things have
happened before.
Yeah, and like people. The PC is kind of the redheaded stepchild sometimes.
Vote with your wallet, then I
That's
suppose.
the only thing.
But you don't know, right? Sometimes you pre-order a game and you're really excited.
You could not pre-order, right? I think that's a popular opinion.
Yeah,
and I think I can get behind that as well.
I would say read more sites like Maximum PC or PC Gamer who get early demos of the game and play it, and then we'll report the problems.
Basically, really. Do your research before you shell out for the game. Realize that every review is going to be a little subjective. But generally speaking, people who are doing reviews have go over the same stuff like PC Gamer. They go through a lot of games. They play everything they review. So they've got a good wealth of experience of what they should expect out of a quality game. So you can definitely trust something like that. Some of the smaller things like what you like in the storyline, whatever, that may be up in the air. But in terms of like core functionality, does it work?
Yeah,
like, you need to know does it actually work
like
on my machine. That's
30
a very
frames per second
thing.
frame rate cap, locked at 1080p or 720p or whatever. Those are terrible things.
Don't buy a $60, $70 game thinking, oh, I hope it'll just be better by the time it ships, or maybe it'll get better in 2 months when there are drivers for it. That's really kind of a poor way to go about it because it might never be fixed.
I think it's hard to avoid just because games now are completely... The advent of digital distribution didn't help this situation at all because now it's all about ship and then patch later. Whereas in the console days, where most games, almost all games were on the console, you had to do it right to ship it. Because it was on a chip, in a cartridge, it was physical.
Well, even old PC games, when you got the CD or DVD, when you got the CD or DVD, like if you wanted to update it, like I remember Quake 3, you had to go as a user and go download the patch and install it manually, which means that Quake 3 Arena had to work well out of the box.
Yeah, there was the time before the internet.
Right, exactly.
I remember floppies.
This is when...
What was there was an old game.
The internet was still slow.
What was it, Dark Ages or something? I remember that, and it was so buggy when it shipped that they actually sent people who bought it new floppy disks. But the problem has always been there. I've been in gaming for 30 years now, more, and there's always been buggy games and there's always been good games. And I think at the end of the day, you got to buy the stuff that works well. And I know it's hard to wait for the reviews, but I remember buying games without reading reviews and getting burned so many times that I stopped doing it. And even when you read the reviews, sometimes you buy a game and you're like, oh man, this got a 90% at PC Gamer, and you buy the game and you're like, this sucks. That was kind of SimCity for me, the original. Like, it got all these rave reviews, and I never have enjoyed SimCity games. Which isn't to say that they're not great for some people, but know what you like, and learn a little bit of patience, because buying on day zero or pre-ordering, especially in these days, is a bad idea unless you really, really trust the developer.
Yeah. Or somehow you got early access to a beta or something, and you already know.
All right, so one last question. Dakota Davis on Twitter asks, i7 2600K versus FX 8350 in gaming and video editing. I guess he wants the feedback between those two, as well as MOBO features.
So we're talking the FX series versus Skylake?
So specifically, no. Specifically FX 8350 versus Intel's i7 2600K.
Oh, so we're talking older generation stuff. Sandy Bridge.
Maybe this is a...
Sandy Bridge is like, that's second generation, and we're now on sixth generation. But, for doing stuff of that age, I'm like, they're both going to be pretty decent, but they're not going to trump like your latest and greatest stuff. Back in the Sandy Bridge versus the FX series, it's probably, depending on the task, there's going to be times where Intel wins, there's going to be times where AMD wins, and it's going to largely depend on the actual application you're using, because there were some apps that did really, really well on AMD's architecture, where you've got essentially 8 full integer cores but only 4 floating point cores. But then there were other things that ran really poorly on AMD's architecture. So unfortunately, I'd have to actually go and dig up some old research to see which one I would take. But I'm like, those are both like 3, 4, 5 year old things. So buy a new computer.
Jared's lazy. Just buy a new computer. I'm not gonna take that off. All right, cool. I think that about wraps it up. Then you can check us out online at www.maximumpc.com. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and subscribe to us on Google Play, iTunes, Kindle, Nook, and Zinio. On behalf of the Maximum PC crew, thank you for listening.
Ciao.
Later.